Hello everyone, and welcome to Orthodox Shahada. I'm Kai, and this presentation is part of a series examining Hadith methodology. In this video, we look at the main reason that the Hadith compilation known as Sahih Muslim is considered to be inferior to Sahih al-Bukhari. After the Quran, Sunni Muslims consider the two Hadith compilations known as Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim to be the most authentic sources with regards to Muhammad's actions and sayings. These two compilations are foundational sources of Sunni Islamic law and are what Sunni Muslims predominantly turn to when Quran, Surah 33 verse 21 tells them that in Muhammad is the best exemplar for all mankind. Though both compilations are highly regarded by Sunni Muslims, overall Sahih Muslim is considered inferior to that of Sahih al-Bukhari. Some of the secondary reasons for this inferiority have to do with differences in the narrators Bukhari and Muslim relied on. It is generally regarded that Bukhari's chains of narrators are stronger than Muslim's, though both yield Sahih hadiths. Think of it like an A+ given to a mark anywhere in the range 90 to 100. The person who gets a mark of 90 gets the same letter grade, namely A+, as the one who gets 100. Nevertheless, the one who gets 90 is inferior to the one who gets 100. There are also differences in the narrators Bukhari and Muslim rejected. This is not to be confused with simply not utilized. Muslim explicitly rejected some narrators that Bukhari relied on. And overall, the breadth and detail of topics covered in Sahih Muslim is not as expansive as what is in Sahih al-Bukhari. But the main reason Sahih Muslim is inferior to Bukhari is because Muslim does not require we be able to establish with 100% certainty that the narrators actually met each other, only that it is probable that they could have met. Example, that they lived in the same vicinity at the same time period. Contrasting Bukhari and Muslim, the narration chain of Bukhari's hadiths are along the lines of, we know with absolute certainty that person A narrated to person B, and we know with absolute certainty that person B narrated to person C. With regards to Muslim, we have things along the lines of, there is a probability that person A could have narrated to person B, and there is a probability that person B could have narrated to person C. In other words, Muslim does not require certainty, while Bukhari does. Now, just a side note, by certainty is meant within the standards of Islamic tradition. Just because Bukhari claims with certainty that one person narrated to another does not automatically make the claim true. It is only true within the epistemic framework of Sunni Hadith methodology. Also, we need to highlight an important point. Muslim's requirement is not that person A would have probably narrated to person B and so on, but that person A could have probably narrated to person B. Muslim does not require there to be motive for why one person would narrate to another. All Muslim requires is that there just exist situational circumstances to make narration possible if it were to actually happen. Imam Nawawi in his commentary to Sahih Muslim, quote, one aspect of giving al-Bukhari's book preference is that Muslims subscribe to a view he stated at the beginning of his book as being unanimously agreed upon by scholars. This view suggests that a chain of transmission that states one reporter after another acquires the same degree as a chain that clearly quotes reporters saying, quote, I heard this from, quote, if the one stating this and the one from whom is reporting were contemporaries, even though it is not established that they met each other. This gives greater weight to al-Bukhari's anthology. However, we do not judge Muslim on the basis of his acceptance of this view in his Sahih, because he includes many reports with different chains that make this view hard to operate. But God knows best. End quote. And now Muslim himself. Quote, the one we started by quoting pointing out his wrong judgment, claims that every chain of transmission, which includes one person reporting from another when we know that they were contemporaries and that the latter might have actually heard the hadith from the former and might have received it directly from him, yet we do not know for certain that the latter heard from the former, nor do we find in any report that they have ever met or conversed, then any report that is given in this way does not provide strong evidence. There must be confirmed knowledge that the two have met at least once, or that they exchanged information, or that we must have a report that they met at least once in their lifetime. Without such knowledge or authentic report that this reporter met the one he reports from at least once and listened to him, then the report does not serve as evidence. It remains in abeyance until information is received that the reporter actually listened to some hadiths, however few or many, from the one he reports from. This view, which questions chains of transmission, has no sound basis. It is without precedence, and no scholar of repute has endorsed such an idea. The fact is that the common view agreed by scholars of hadith and reports, old and contemporary, is that every reliable person who reports from one who is equally reliable, and the two might have met and exchanged information because they were contemporaries, is valid and may be cited as evidence, even though we have no report that they actually met and discussed anything. Only if we have clear evidence that this reporter never met the one he reports from or never heard anything directly from him does the hadith so reported become unacceptable and may not be cited as evidence. If the matter remains possible and the meeting between them remains probable, then the report is taken as indicating that the reporter heard from the one he is quoting. Such is the case unless proved otherwise, as I have explained." End quote. And again, Muslim himself, quote, "All these tabi'in whose reports from the Prophet's companions we have named were not known to have heard those particular hadiths from those companions of the Prophet, or to have met them so as to learn these particular hadiths. Yet these chains of transmission are considered to be fine and accurate by discerning scholars of hadith and its reporting. We do not know that such scholars considered any of them weak or lacking authenticity, nor did they seek to establish that any of them heard directly from another. That every one of them could have heard from the one he was quoting is perfectly possible, because they lived at the same time." End quote. So one of the most authentic books Sunni Muslims utilize to establish Islamic truths is constrained by the following. Muslim was not an eyewitness to anything he narrated. Muslim is narrating events that occurred well over 200 years before him. Also, Muslim does not require narrators to have actually met. Now, can you imagine the amount of ridicule Muslims would level at Christians if Christians said that one of the most authentic gospel accounts was written 200 years after Christ, and it is not important to establish with certainty that narrators actually ever met each other during those 200 years? The Muslim is not on secure footing to object by saying things like, "We have the biographies of the narrators." The problem with the biographies of the narrators will be examined in a separate video. The point being made here is one of epistemology. Muslim is not an eyewitness, nor does he require his narrators to have met, meaning that there is no a priori epistemic requirement in hadith methodology that mandates hadiths be narrated by eyewitnesses the moment they are written down, or to ascertain that the accounts are part of an explicit authoritative tradition of preservation, for example, the Church. So on those epistemic grounds alone, Muslims cannot object to Christian accounts of the gospel for not being recorded down in writing by an eyewitness, like Sahih Muslim, or for the gospel accounts to have been preserved within a church body, like a random body of Muslims. But just to speak to the example of the gospel, if we apply Muslims' hadith standards, then what you actually get are the Gnostic Gospels. Remember, the Gnostic Gospel accounts were written down, namely invented, in the 2nd century. None of the Gnostic Gospels are eyewitness accounts, nor do any of the Gnostic Gospels have a robust chain of transmission traceable to Christ. Yet, parts of those Gnostic Gospels found their way into the Quran. For example, see Surah 5, verse 110. Those Gnostic accounts you find in the Quran satisfy Muslims' hadith standards. So even though Sahih al-Bukhari supposedly has better epistemic certainty with its hadiths, the Quran itself would seem to allow for inferior standards of transmission like we find in Sahih Muslim.